Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, November 13th, 2025. The Nefarium, as you can imagine, has been very busy while no one's been looking and everyone's been distracted by government shutdowns, party politics, theater, and everything else. So we're going to get back to that, but first, the housekeeping. Remember, tomorrow afternoon at 4 o'clock U.S. Central Time, we have an evening vid chat, our first evening vid chat of November, and we are coming to the end of the year with vid chats. This will be the fourth to the last vid chat of 2025. Remember, I have some changes, minor changes in the vid chat coming up in the new year, but I'll be announcing those in the new year. A few little tiny format changes in response to some requests from some of you that I decided I should probably pay attention to. All right. Now, today's blog or podcast, whatever you want to call it, a podcast blog, I guess. This may be something I actually blog about in writing as well as talk about today because it's an important subject. And the reason I'm doing that is because I did blog about this subject earlier in the week, and I was using an article from 2023 to talk about the concepts. Now, I was pulled up short by a commenter on the website for not alerting people that the story was from 2023, and that is my fault. I do occasionally blog about stories that are not new, but I usually let people know that I am blogging about an old story for a particular purpose, and I forgot to do that this time. So my apologies to that individual and to the rest of you for not putting the notice out there. I did note that the story was from 2023 when I was blogging about it. I just forgot to post the notice. Anyway, but the subject matter of that blog concerns the subject matter of today's news and views from the Nefarium, because I think we're watching something happening, and if you're paying attention to these stories over the last 2 to 3 years, you're beginning to notice a pattern to them. And it's that pattern that I want to draw attention to. And as I say, I might be actually doing this news and views from the Nefarium next week as a written blog as well, because I want to make sure everybody kind of latches onto this story. Now, this story is about the following article that appeared on Yahoo. The author's name is Arjun Parashar. I assume that that's a Hindi name, and I hope I'm not butchering the pronunciation. But there are actually two articles in this link. I'm going to be reading a couple of paragraphs from both of these articles. They're both about the same story. The story is that the People's Republic of China has accused the United States of America of stealing $13 billion in Bitcoin. Okay? Now that may not seem like a very big deal, but trust me here, I think this is a huge story. So let's start out. I'll read a few paragraphs from the first article and a couple of paragraphs from the second article, and I think you'll get the story, but I really want you to pay very close attention and read between the lines on this one, because it's that little part in between the lines that is the part that's huge with implications and that form the basis of today's high-octane speculative nosedive into the speculation canyon. So from the beginning of the first article, these two paragraphs, quote, "A Chinese government agency has accused the United States of taking part in a massive cryptocurrency theft, claiming Washington unlawfully seized 127,000 Bitcoin worth around $13 billion that were stolen from a Chinese mining pool in 2020. Again, so in other words, this is an old story. China's National Computer Virus Emergency Response Center said in a report on Sunday that the U.S. Department of Justice's seizure of the funds was connected to a state-level hacking organization, according to Global Times, a state-owned outlet affiliated with the People's Daily. Now, let me stop right there. Remember how we were all told when cryptocurrency first made their appearance on the scenes about 10 years ago, a little over that actually, how they were utterly secure and unhackable. Remember that? Now you notice how that part of the narrative has been quietly dropped over the past few years. Now, at the time, there were a few lonely voices out there. Catherine Austin Fitts was one of them. I was another one. There were a couple of others that appeared on Greg Hunter's program. There were a few lonely voices out there that were saying, no, this is not unhackable. It is not a secure system. There's no such thing as cybersecurity. It isn't there. And now, all of a sudden, we're being reminded that these are not only not secure systems, but now we're being told that various governments and other entities around the world are taking advantage of this to steal. Okay? Just tuck that away. We'll get back to that. Now, I'm skipping just one short little paragraph in that opening article. Quote, open source blockchain forensics from Arkham, Milksad, and Elliptic show the wallets were compromised due to weak random number generation, not a state-led hack. Oh, well, that makes me feel reassured. It's all a programming fault, not hacking. Okay, with me so far? Again, the issue here is the security of the system, not who is or is not doing it. The U.S. Department of Justice later seized the same wallets. Well, wait a minute. Now, it is hacking, linking them to alleged money laundering. Oh, you can use this stuff to launder money. Isn't that convenient? Alleged money laundering by Chen Ji and the Prince Group. So, not only do we have security, we don't know who's doing this, but we're fairly certain that governments are. And oh, by the way, you can use this stuff to launder money. Doesn't get any better. And people wonder why I'm so against cryptocurrency and wonder why I've started nicknaming cryptocurrency klepto-currency. It's because you're dealing in unreality and you're dealing in non-secure systems. This is a mafia don, bank robbers, grifter, counterfeiter, and every other sort of fraudulent schemer's wet dream. That's what this is. One more paragraph from this first article, quote, the Computer Virus Emergency Response Center's analysis disputes Washington's position that the funds were criminal proceeds. So in other words, Washington went in and seized the funds on the allegation. Please note, the mere allegation, not any sort of due process, not any sort of legal finding by a court, but went in and seized the funds on the allegation of criminal proceeds, asset forfeiture. Okay? And incidentally, assets belonging to a foreign national. Claiming instead that the U.S. operation may have been linked to the same attackers behind the original theft. In other words, the Chinese are saying that the people behind the original theft were government hackers, and now the government is stepping in to seize the assets of the people that did the original hack against the Chinese national in the first place. Does it get any better, folks? All right, now, I'm skipping to the second article in that link here. The article is titled, Chinese Cybersecurity Watchdog Alleges U.S. Stole $13.2 billion in Bitcoin 5 years ago. Okay? Now, please remember, this is a story from 5 years ago. And it's still being wrangled and argued and sorted out. File that one away because this plays a huge part in my speculation today. So just a couple of paragraphs from this article that give us a little bit more detail. After the theft, Chen Ji's team reportedly sent blockchain messages in 2021 and 2022 offering a ransom for the return of the funds, which stayed untouched notice that, untouched for 4 years before being moved in mid-2024. Now, let me stop right there and tell you that I find it highly unlikely that those funds remained untouched. I'm going to tell you what I think is going on here in just a minute. In its report, CVERC further alleged that the U.S. government, quote, may have already stolen the 127,000 bitcoins held by Chen Ji through hacking techniques back in 2020, making the seizure a typical black eats black operation orchestrated by a state-level hacking organization, unquote, the analysis reads as machine translated from Mandarin. In other words, the Chinese government agency is alleging that this was a two-tiered operation. One, a black operation to seize assets, which assets in turn were seized by another black operation which had penetrated the first black operation. Are you with me, folks? So, what's going on here? Well, first of all, I want you to notice that we have a case of asset seizure simply because of an allegation, as I've already pointed out. But here's the problem in this story. Do you trust the United States government? This is, after all, the government that murdered one of its own presidents in cold blood and then said that it was a magic bullet found nearly in pristine condition on a stretcher after having performed all sorts of somersaulting gymnastics to kill the president, wound the governor of Texas, and after having been fired from a misaligned Italian carbine World War II rifle with a misaligned telescopic sight. Okay, that government. The government that literally lied to you about Waco, Ruby Ridge, the savings and loan scandal, you name it, they've been lying ever since. So do you trust that government in this sort of asset seizure operation and what they are claiming? And notice, again, this was asset seizure without any sort of real due process. And in this case, asset seizure of a foreign national who happens to be a foreign national of a major world power. Okay. Do you trust, on the other hand, the Chinese government? This is, after all, a communist government and a Maoist government that if you go to Asia and ask the other countries that have to do business with that country, do any of them trust that government? Does North Korea? Does South Korea? Does Japan? Does Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, Burma, Thailand? Well, the answer again is no. None of them trust the Chinese government for very good reason. The Silk Road indebting operation notwithstanding. And then we have yet another level in these two articles. We have a hint that we're not dealing just with one sort of actor. We're dealing with a penetrated operation that could be anybody. Corporations, governments, private hacking groups, as I alleged in that blog that I was put on my website from a couple years ago, that the individual called me to task for writing about a story that was old. Okay. And my point in the story was, we may be dealing with private hacking groups that have penetrated everything else and are acting in their own agenda, whatever that may be. So one of the lessons to take away here is this whole klepto-currency, central bank digital currency system that they want to bring in, is this whole system secure? And the answer is no. In fact, if anything, what we are watching is a system that is wildly, somersaultingly wildly insecure, and this is the financial system they want to foist on everybody else. And the reason they want to foist it on everybody else is quite simply demonstrated in these two articles, that this system is so insecure it makes things much easier for those with criminal intent to steal assets. That's the game. That's the goal. It's like the bank robbers inserting their own closed-circuit television in every bank that they intend to rob. So the system is not secure, it is not stable, and at the heart of it, you'll notice that it's based on asset seizure. Golly gosh, could this have something to do with the tokenization of assets that we see being advocated in conjunction with the emergence of central bank digital currencies? Well, of course it does. They want to make those assets as easy to seize as possible. The problem is that in seizing those assets, they may in turn be opening themselves up to having those very same assets stolen by somebody else, even as they're stealing them from us. So what's going on here? What's the method? Well, I am going to be bold to suggest that the method that they're using is the old bankster, time-honored trick of using, please follow me very carefully here, of using the float to make money. And what's the float? Well, back in the day when you were writing checks to pay bills on your demand account at your local bank, that's what a check is. It's a written demand against an account held by a bank. The period between the bank getting your check in the mail and when that check actually cleared, that period was a period called the float, in which the funds represented by that check were in a kind of limbo. They weren't credited to the bank or the bill holder's account, and yet they weren't being debited against your account. So those funds existed in a kind of accounting limbo where the bank holding the check could then use those funds as part of its assets in very short-term trading, using those funds to trade before the check cleared. And back in the day, that could take anywhere from 3 days up, in some cases, if you recall, if you're my age, up to a full business week. All right? So you had a week to use someone else's money to execute transactions. That's essentially what was going on. Now, I am suggesting to you that this method has been revised with the appearance of klepto-currency, because if you can seize assets of a foreign national without due process, and then force that foreign national, as in this case, to try to litigate the return of their funds. Please notice that this has been going on now for 5 years, and in that 5 years' time, that $13 billion or so represents money in the float, that whoever's holding those wallets of cryptocurrency and has access to those accounts can use it to execute other transactions until such time as it may be necessary to reimburse the original account holder for those assets. So in other words, I'm suggesting to you that really one of the key things behind the emergence of kleptocurrency is the reemergence of the old idea of using the float on steroids. Please underline, italicize, and boldface that. Because this is the game that they're playing. They're using the financial limbo of certain types of funds as a means of executing transaction before those funds actually clear. And so long as those funds are held in a legal limbo, they can continue to do so. And this is one asset. This is one aspect of what I think is going on with the emergence of the kleptocurrency world. And trust me, I think there are many others. But this one is a huge one. And this story, though 5 years old, please note, has not gone away. So the real question that people should be asking, well, where are those funds and who is using them and for what purpose? Notice that in the unregulated kleptocurrency environment, virtually anybody could be using those funds for virtually any purpose. And again, please note that if there were regulation, it would have to be international in nature or subject to the stipulations of an international convention that several parties are signatory to. And we're a long way from that. So, folks, once again, I don't care how much money you may have made in your own kleptocurrency account, you're dealing with a system that will eventually defraud you. So that's it for today's news and views from the Nefarium. Please remember, get your questions and comments for tomorrow evening's 4 o'clock in the evening vid chat at 4 o'clock U.S. Central Time. Get your questions and comments submitted no later than 10 o'clock U.S. Central Time tonight. Bye-bye, everybody. We'll see you on the flip side.